Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again. So I'd encourage you, last night was actually quite academic, but I think that builds on what we're going to talk about tonight. So there'll be a bit of recapping, and if there's something that you want to know a little bit more about afterwards, just come and chat to us, because it is actually quite exciting when you understand the mechanisms, because it just makes decision making more practical and realistic. I'm just going to do the intro, and I'm going to ask Adele to then go into the meat of it. We're just going to bring this up again. I think there's a few new people. We're not here to change your prescriptions. We're here to just provide some information, because we've had very close family die from cancer. It evoked in us an academic desire to know how to reduce that risk. So Adele has spent countless hours studying this. I've got it through osmosis and a little bit of reading myself, but she's really world-class in knowledge, cutting knowledge that's out there right now, and bringing it together is quite hard, and she's done a phenomenal job. So each lecture builds on the next. Yesterday we looked at the mechanisms, and today the factors that are going to trigger, turn on and off those mechanisms. All right, so just remember, we're not here to change your scripts, we're here to advise. And if you have any decisions that you need to make, you can speak to us afterwards, and we can also liaise with your oncologist if you need to. All right, so what we're going to look at now is an acronym. It's called New Start. So New Start is something that was created in America by the Weimar Institute, quite a famous institute, and they're quite famous for their lifestyle interventions. A lot of that information has filtered down to our topic today. They're very well known for reversing type 2 diabetes with some of their lifestyle changes that they've shown scientifically to treat. And also, I know that some of the resistant depression was also reversed with this. So it's we're not just talking about cancer, there's some other benefits too for some of these things. Now, what does New Start stand for? We're just going to have a summary on that. Okay, the first one is nutrition. So we're going to look at nutrition, how that affects our health, our immune system, and therefore how your body can combat cancer. The effects of exercise. We had a brief look at some of the statistics last night about exercise, how it can change by 40% your incidence. Plain water, mountain juice. Okay, water has a dramatic effect on your immune system. Sunlight. Now, we were having an interesting discussion last night, some of us, about vitamin D. It's not just vitamin D that you get from sunlight, but some fascinating statistics that have come out. And I particularly have an interest in this because it affects orthopedic surgery and their outcomes. Most patients, men included, but women especially, that I've tested, they're low. We have 80 to 90% of my patients that come in for surgery, their vitamin D is low. And that affects your immune system, and especially in females, breast cancer risk, if your vitamin D is a certain level, can be reduced by 83%. Okay, so we don't get enough sunlight because we're scared of the sun, because we're worried about skin cancer, but there's a lot of other cancers that we can be victims of because we don't have enough vitamin D. So some very interesting information we'll talk about. What is temperance? So temperance is when you don't eat excessive amount of chocolate, okay? That's my cross I have to bear. Temperance is when you abstain from that which is bad and moderate from that which is borderline and good, okay? So just a few chocolates a day, John. That's temperance. Air, fresh air. I don't know if you've ever been training, Bruce, in the gym, and you come out and that like fresh air is like, oh, that's amazing. Fresh air has a huge impact on our ventilation, on our perfusion of our brains. Rest, you're going to see Adele's going to present how sleep can affect your immune system and cancer risk. And that especially was impactful for us who do shift works, who work through the nights in our training, and how it impacts on our cancer risk. Okay, sleep patterns are very key to your immune system. And then trust. There's so many studies done on that, how that can actually affect your stress levels, your immune system, and ultimately your risk for cancer too. So some exciting things that you are in control of. That's the key. It's very hard for you and I to go to an oncologist and know what dose of radiation and chemotherapy. We've got to just trust the system. But this, you can be in control of the risk factors that matter more than some of the treatments that we have to offer in medicine. All right. So just remember, knowledge does not produce an outcome. You have to act on that knowledge. I had to cancel a patient today, a medical doctor, because he came in with metabolic syndrome. He knows everything, but he's not taking his blood pressure treatment. He's in denial about his diabetes, and we had to cancel his surgery. Okay, knowledge doesn't produce results. Okay, so he's coming back in 2 months' time. Hopefully, he will apply that knowledge now. And I've been guilty of the same. So I want you to gain knowledge while you're here, and then you have to process it and decide at what level of application you're going to put this in your personal life. And that's a decision that we have to act on. And that comes down to choice. All right, so let's ask Adele to come up. We're going to build on yesterday's talk. Thanks, Adele.
Good evening, everybody. I see a lot of the faces who were here yesterday and then quite a few new faces. So welcome to all of you who weren't here last night. So last night we really looked at what happens in your body. We went deep into some of the biochemical processes, and it may have been a little bit technical, but we tried to make it understandable. And from whom I asked, it sounds as if most people followed. If you missed out on last night, don't worry. There may be a few little references that you go like, what is she talking about? But the rest of the information is still going to be very, very relevant to you, and you're definitely going to learn something or maybe just confirm something that you already know. Okay, so as I go on, we're going to try and refer back to all those mechanisms that increase your risk for cancer that we spoke about last night. And then there's a very important thing that I want to just bring to the fore. I know that many people last night went home and was like, oh, now I'm scared of drinking milk. I'm scared of doing this. I'm scared of doing, and if I come out of a shower, can I actually put cream on, This is not the idea. It's not fear-mongering. The idea is just to give you information so that you, in the end, can come up with a lifestyle plan for yourself. And it's very important because God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind, so that we can make wise choices. So let's remember that. In the end, it's about the big picture, and we need to be careful not to zone in only on one thing. In the end, it's a lot of lifestyle factors that compound together and come together to give us a healthy body. Okay, so let's dive into it. Before we go, we have promised you that it is going to be scientific. So I told you last night as well, I'm trying to refrain as much as possible from opinion and rather just keep to science. And where I do give opinion, I will definitely let you know that this is my opinion on something. But now I just want to quickly just go through something quickly. Not all science is good science. And that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind. It's very easy to extrapolate from a single study and to find evidence that supports your view. Just like I can read my Bible and try and find evidence to believe what I already believe and then say, yeah, then I'm right, rather than actually looking, how can I change my viewpoint? What is God actually trying to tell me? That kind of analogy. So that's the same thing with evidence, with scientific research. You can very easily manipulate and misinterpret. So when we look for evidence in studies, we look at the type of studies, and I've made a bit of a list of the studies there. I don't want to go into it too deep because I've got so much information to share. But what I just want to point out is that there is a place for everything in different studies. Especially, I want to just mention that lab studies was very relevant to what we did last night. all those biochemical processes, those things are often found in labs first, and then it's taken further to an animal study, and then to interventional or randomized controlled trials. Now, randomized controlled trials is like the queen of research. Everybody says, was it a randomized controlled trial before they will believe it? I'm not going to go into that too much. But I want to lift out something, and that is epidemiological studies. Those studies are the most important when you look at things that affect a lot of people, like diet and like lifestyle. And when we want to know how does eating apples affect people, it doesn't help to take 100 people and look at them. You need thousands to really know, is this really what happens? And you need thousands over many different population groups and many different areas before you can be sure what that particular aspect of lifestyle do to you. So the information that I'm going to be sharing with you regarding statistics is going to be mainly, almost all of them is going to be from big epidemiological studies, so we can be sure that this is good science. But there is something that I just want to also point out when it comes to science. If you say something often enough, loud enough, and with enough confidence, people tend to believe you. And you can quote pseudoscience in that way, and people who don't know better will go like, oh, but it's science, because he said it very confidently, so it must be. So the question that I just want to ask you is, who do you listen to? Because many social media influencers have a lot of things in their talks and stuff that is true, but often they take aspects from one study that support their already formed view and then run with it and say, yes, but it's been proven. And when we look at studies, we look at a trend. You can't take one study and that one study said this and now we must believe it. You look at a trend of a lot of studies and say, is this reproducible? That is the biggest thing about scientific research. Is it reproducible? So I just want to ask you that when you are out there and you listen to all these guys, some of them has got some really good information. There are some of them are really great, but always just think a little bit deeper than just believing everything you hear. Okay, so a true scientist is usually one who's an expert in his field. And now saying here, I am not a nutritionist and I'm not an oncologist. I don't regard myself as an expert. I'm just presenting to you the research of other people today, okay? And they're usually so busy with their own work, they don't have time to go and sit on social media. So that's usually the people you need to listen to. So let's go ahead. So we've spoken about New Start. I'm going to use that acronym to go through because I personally in my life like the New Start acronym because it's a nice little checklist for me. Am I looking after my diet today? Have I exercised? Am I drinking water? It's a nice checklist to go through. So I'm going to follow that acronym as we run through it. But I just want to already say to you that I don't think I'm going to be able to cover everything in tonight's talk. I may need to roll some of this information over. And as I was going through this again today, I was trying to see what I can cut. But I also don't want to shortchange you with some of this information that's so important. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to rather ask your permission to rather roll over and just cover what needs to be covered. Okay, so for nutrition, we're going to obviously look at our macronutrients. Then we're going to move over to our micronutrients, that's our vitamins, minerals, and our phytonutrients. And then we're going to look at when do we eat? Is that important? And then we're going to try and come to a conclusion. Okay, so first we're going to start with a big contentious one. I'm just going to jump right in there because everybody has the question of protein on their lips, isn't it so? Because isn't that the big thing? Wherever you go, you hear protein, protein, protein. So that's what we're going to look at. I'm going to do a quick revision of our growth signals because this is very relevant to protein. If you can remember last night, so why growth signals is important for those who weren't here last night, is that something that drives cells to multiply too quickly can cause the cells to have a little typo in its DNA, which we call a mutation. And once mutations heap up in a cell, it can bring that cell to a point where it actually changes over into a cancer cell. So we don't like things that drive mutation. We want our bodies to mutate, or not to mutate, to differentiate and to form new cells when it is necessary, right? So we have learned that the normal method is growth hormone that stimulates IGF-1, that is our accelerator, and then that is our green light, our accelerator, and the accelerator will then open our throttle, the mTOR, and then it will say, okay, there we go, let's divide, let's make daughter cells, right? But we have also learned that there are factors like insulin and like some amino acids that will bypass that and go directly to the accelerator, and those things then put it into a strong foot on the floor, and we just keep on dividing. And amino acids is your strongest pathway. Amino acids come from protein, just as a little reminder. That's the building blocks of protein. That's our strongest pathway of stimulating cell division. Okay, so the question is, what type of protein is important? We have already touched on it last night. But I thought it's important that we just look at a few more details on that. So these are epidemiological studies, so very big population studies. You can see the studies of the size of 238,000 people there. That's the biggest one. That one, 500,000, some in between. And they were followed up for up to 49 years. You can see the periods over which these studies were done. Now, can you see that this is proper science, right? Rather than something that looked at a few people over 3 months. Makes sense, right? I want to start by pointing out the China study. That is from Cornell and Oxford. It was a combined study from them. And this wasn't a true epidemiological study. It was actually a historical cross-sectional study where they looked back on a big population. But why I just want to mention that is actually out of respect for the work that they've done. It was done by Campbell and his team, and they were actually the ones who, for the first time, opened this can of worms of there's a difference in what the outcomes of people who eat different types of proteins and different types of food types. And from there, everybody was like, what is going on? And they started analyzing all these other epidemiological studies. So they were really groundbreaking. So it's an amazing start to this whole question. So they were more, say, the hypothesis generating, what is going on? So then there are all these other big studies. And I'm just going to jump straight to the conclusions. I know it's a bit small. Can you kind of read a little bit? Red says, higher animal protein associated with the increased colorectal cancer risk. Okay. Also with breast, it's also there pointed out, right? Strong evidence. Animal protein linked to increased colorectal cancer. Red and processed meats, increased colorectal cancer. Okay. So it goes on. All of them, it's got exactly the same outcome. Animal protein. The green says plant protein is associated with a lower mortality and some cancer risks in those one. Let's just have a look if anyone says. Vegetarians had a lower overall and a gastrointestinal cancer rate in this epidemiological study that they found. Plant-forward diets were protective. So it's not me that's saying this. It is the evidence, the real proper evidence that's saying eat more plants. Okay, I know this is very contrary to what you are hearing on Instagram and YouTube today, but I am just saying what the real science is saying. Right, so this particular study, the AHS2 study, actually gives us a very nice breakdown because that is one fairly contained population. In fact, this was done in one of the blue zones in California. You know what the blue zones are? Where they have these centenarians, people who get very old. That's one of the blue zones. They took this group and they actually looked at their diets also over many, many years, and then they categorized them. And they said, okay, because this is a nice mixed population in there, most of the other lifestyle factors were quite the same. So the outcome is not so much confounded by other things, like none of them were smokers, none of them used alcohol, and the other factors like exercise and that type of thing was fairly the same. So they could now take their diets out and see, is diet really the big factor, or are there other things that also confound it? And in this case, not. So yeah, they used, sorry for the word vegan, I should have put in there plant-based, because many plant-based people don't like to be called vegans because it's so much associated with kind of new age kind of thinking. So I apologize for that. It was kind of a reflex. But they used them, I used them when we pulled out this data as the reference points, as the lowest group, right? Oh no, sorry, the non-vegetarians. I'm lying to you. The non-vegetarians, so those are the meat eaters that we used as reference. They had the highest animal protein level, and also why we use them as reference is because it was already proven in the study that they had the highest cancer rates. So we use them as reference, and then we compared the other groups and say how much did it change from that point if you changed your diet. Those who had a lower meat intake than the non-vegetarian, than the meat eaters. So these were like semi-vegetarian. So they ate meat maybe just once a week. Their risk was already about 10 to 15% lower just by cutting the amount of their meat eating. Then we had the pesco-vegetarians. Those are the fish eaters, but no meat eaters. Their risk came down by 20 to 25%. That's the overall incidence, and this is the colorectal cancer incidence. 20 to 5% for colorectal cancer, 10 to 15% for overall cancer incidence. Then those who didn't eat fish but had milk and egg in their diet, the risk was similar to whether you ate fish or not. And then those who were purely plant-based, who had very, very low animal protein. So what their definition was less than once a week we will take in any plant, any animal product. Look how much lower their incidence of cancer was. Okay, so this is just supportive of those previous studies, but it is a nice comparison in this study. Okay, so I'm going to leave you then to come to your own conclusion here, which kind of protein, whether it will be a plant protein or animal protein, will be best for your body as far as cancer risk is concerned. Okay, so now the next question then is how much protein is good for us? And here I'm actually referring to the groundbreaking study that was done in cell metabolism. So this was a study where they took a whole lot of subjects and they separated them into different groups. This was done by Morgan Levine. She is an extremely well-published researcher. She's got so many studies out there. She's very well quoted, very well respected. And Walter Longo was a co-author as well. It's a scientist that I really, really respect. They are both more into longevity research and trying to, juventology, as they call it, how do you stay younger? But especially Walter Longo has been branching out into cancer research very much lately. So his work is also very interesting. So let's just read the heading of this article. It says, low protein intake is associated with a major reduction in IGF-1. Who remembers what the IGF-1 is? Oh, very good. You're such good students. Yes, that's the accelerator. Well done. You know more than most of the doctors out there now, hey? Because they've long forgotten about IGF-1. They're worried about blood pressure. Anyway, so a low protein intake is associated with a major reduction in IGF-1 in cancer and in overall mortality in the 65 and younger group, but not so much in the older populations. And I'm going to show you what they said about the older population. Okay, so what we've done here in this particular table, they have now already proven that a low protein intake is your best. with the lowest incidence, right? So use that as your reference. So in low protein intake, they use 10% of energy from their total calories that they took in every day was from protein. Okay, so not more than that. Rest was carbohydrates and fats. Right? So they used an approximate protein intake that we extrapolated from the average calories. They didn't actually measure the per grams, but they did an extrapolation. It's about 0.6 to 0.7 kilogram per day. That is how most nutritionists will do that, because it's very hard to actually measure the grams. And actually, you look at the percentages. All of the European guidelines work in percentage, and then they do extrapolation from there. So that is our reference point, the low protein, 0.6 to 0.7 gram per kg. They had the lowest cancer risk. Then if you started taking a moderate protein, that is 0.8 to 1.2 gram per kg, their risk jumped immediately to 20 to 40% higher than the low protein intake. If you took it higher to more than to 1.3 to 1.6 gram, which is still lower than what some of the new guidelines of 2 grams say, look what happens. Okay, if there's a 200% increase, if a 100% increase means it doubles, right? A 200% increase means it triples. Okay? A 300% increase means it's 4 times higher than your risk if you take a low protein intake. It's huge. It's just something to just think about. And then also I just wanted to point out that was in the under 65-year-old. In the over 65 years old, it didn't make a significant difference. And I just want to elaborate on that now quickly. Walter Longo has looked at a whole lot of studies, and he didn't do the work himself. He's busy with that kind of work. I've listened to a talk of his recently. But it seems that when you hit the age of 65, your risk of frailty becomes higher. So and also people tend to eat less as they get older. So people tend to undereat protein too much. So they actually recommend that as you get to the age of 65, if you don't have a contraindication like a kidney problem or liver problem, that's a contraindications for high protein diets, then you should actually push your protein up slightly. And they recommend a level of about from 0.8 before, between 0.7 and 0.8 grams per kg per day to about 1 gram per kg per day. That's the recommendation that they're making. So if any of you are over 65, just keep in mind that for you, it's more important to note on your protein intake, especially if you are not eating very much anymore. Okay, so now the next question now came in the same study that they asked this then, okay, so now we know low protein is better than high protein, but does it make a difference what kind of protein I'm eating? So they did have a look. So they did an adjustment for animal protein. And there's your all-cause mortality. So that is if you died from anything, not just from cancer. If you had a moderate protein intake, your all-cause mortality was up by 15%, so that is a little bit. If you had a high protein intake for all-cause mortality with animal protein predominance, then your risk was about 18% higher. So it's a little bit higher. But still, even with a very high plant protein intake, your all-cause mortality was still higher. So for me, the lesson, how I interpret this, is that a very high protein intake, doesn't matter what your source is not good for your health. It increases your risk of all-cause mortality, whether it is strokes or heart disease or whatever, and it's better to stick with a low protein intake. When they then looked at cancer mortality alone, this is very interesting. Now they're still adjusting for animal protein versus plant protein. Here, there was a massive difference. If you had a moderate intake, animal protein predominance raised your risk by almost 200%. It's just under that, so that's almost triple. And a high protein diet jumped it right over the 200% mark, so that means it's way over triple already. Okay, so what does it say? Plants are friends, right? Plants are friends. Okay, so that was just important for you to make sense. And if we think back of what we did last night again, of those type of amino acids that drives IGF-1, remember we did that chart. I don't think I've pulled it up again. I think I have it later in the presentation, and I'll point it out again. Then it makes sense in our mechanisms that if we have certain amino acids from certain proteins, they step on the accelerator and they make the differentiation fast. Right. So I have a question. What about, oh, here's my chart coming up soon. What about chicken? And I knew that question was going to come up. So in these studies, I just want to mention that they didn't differentiate chicken out because many people don't regard chicken as meat. Especially if you're an Afrikaans person. If you had chicken, you had your vegetables. But the chicken was part of the meat group, right? So it's just another source of animal protein, and they also included eggs as part of the animal protein group. I want to mention just about chicken that, and this is not opinion, I don't have it to show you. I did look this up to make sure that my impressions was correct. Bruce, we spoke about this a bit earlier. Last night I mentioned something about bioaccumulation, that if an animal or a person eats something that has got, or let's rather not say a person, if an animal eats, say, grain that is contaminated with pesticides, that pesticides accumulates in its body, and if you then eat that animal, you get all that pesticides in, right? That's bioaccumulation. Of all the meat types, chicken is the highest risk of pesticide exposure. Okay. Of antibiotic exposure, chickens is your highest risk of being exposed. And it makes sense if you think how frail a chicken is. I mean, they just look at them and they kill over and die, right? So they have to, and if you know if you've been into places where they farm chickens, they are on top of each other. Disease risk is extremely high. So they add a lot of antibiotics. So, and then of course there's a risk of salmonella contamination that is well known. It's real. It's real. And it's a nasty infection to contract. Also a risk with egg. That is why egg should always be well cooked. Runny eggs, you run your risk for salmonella. It's on you. Okay, so I just want to mention here that if you really want to include eggs in your diet, it's your choice. I would say use it sparingly. Try if you can to get it from organic, free-range chickens. But if you have cholesterol problems, be careful with eggs. The egg yolk is high in cholesterol. Okay, right, I'm going to move on, and there's my chart. I wanted to just quickly remind us again. So the IGF-1 is our accelerator that we looked at last night. This is our chart. Sorry, it is a very unclear. I had to copy it from an article, screenshot it, so it wasn't very clear. But down here is our dairy protein, the highest, okay? So that is whey. That one is low-fat milk. That one was yogurt. That one is cheese. There's the eggs, right? There is red meat, chicken. And then we start fish, and then we start moving into the vegetables. That is much lower. Or the plants, that's much lower. So just a reminder of why we last night mentioned that dairy is a very big push on the accelerator. And as somebody who's lived mostly a vegetarian lifestyle for the last 25 years, about, dairy is the one thing that's been the hardest for me to keep out. Because it just kind of slips in everywhere. We still use a little bit of dairy, but we're very, very sparing with our use. So the reminder is, again, also why it stimulates that accelerator is not, it is a specific amino acid that occurs in there called leucine. It's not the only one, it's a group of 5, but leucine is the big culprit that causes this rise in the IGF-1 or the accelerator. Okay. So I'm going to make this disappear, and let's just quickly look at the rest of the dairy. I just wanted to make you also aware, I did mention it last night, but there are a lot of new people here who weren't here last night. I would be remiss if I don't remind you that pregnant cows are milked, they have a lot of estrogen that goes into the milk. Estrogen is reabsorbed in our guts. Our microbiome help a lot if it's healthy to try and stop that reabsorption. But that's why it's so important to make sure you've got a really healthy, active microbiome. And we know that estrogen is so much associated with the breast cancers, the uterine cancers, the endometrial cancers, all those type of risks. Okay, so my choice would be to limit or even to avoid dairy. You can make your own choice in the big scheme of things. It's not always possible to avoid everything in your lifestyle, but at least you can make a decision, I'm going to cut a little bit back on this. Maybe I'll use a replacement like almond milk or something like that. There are options. And you're welcome to come and chat about options if you would like to. And I hope I'm not the bearer of too much bad news tonight. Right. Okay, so I'm going to move on with that one. Let's get to our plant proteins, our legumes. Okay, so we already last night looked quite a bit at legumes. I want to point out that legumes are not our only form of plant protein. Nuts also have quite a lot of plant protein in it. It's predominantly fat and fiber, but it still has some protein in it. Broccoli and spinach both have some protein in it. Whole grains, tiny bit of protein, all of them. Good protein, good amino acids that complement the amino acids in a legume. So if you combine, or at least in a day, both have a whole grain and some legumes, you will have all your essential amino acids. It will be a complete protein that you need. Okay, and then mushrooms also have some protein in. Not a lot, but it does have some in. So if you eat a very nice varying diet, you should get some protein in from your legumes and your seeds. Okay, I did mention last night, it's just always important to rinse if you can soak even. I always soak my legumes anyway because it makes the cooking so much easier. But even my grains, I tend to let them sit a bit, rinse them properly. Then you reduce your pesticide risk by 80%. So it just washes them up because most of the pesticides in plants are surface. They don't penetrate so much. Obviously, there will be a tiny amount, but it's so much lower risk. Okay, so I just want to look at this quickly, show you legume exposure. These are from the AHS-1 study. That study was a precursor of the AHS-2 that I quoted just now. They were able to look at legume use in people. They compared those who ate legumes less than once a week, so they kind of regarded it as very rarely, and those who eat legumes more than twice a week. The colon cancer incidence was 42% lower. That's quite significant. I think that's quite something. And then this is a meta-analysis. So that means they pooled a whole lot of studies together and look at that outcome. And once again, colorectal cancer in this study was overall 9% lower. And in the Asian subgroups, it was 18% lower. But just remember, that's not epidemiological studies. So that's not long-term. It was kind of just extracted data. And then cancer, colonic cancer survivors. This was a study that that was not their primary aim in this study, but it was kind of one of the bit of side information that came out, is that it reduced their biomarkers and the recurrence of adenoma risk in them. So legumes definitely has some protective effect when it comes, especially with colon cancer. That is well proven. We don't really have information about other cancers. It's not really been studied and shown, but with colon cancer risk, we definitely have enough information that it's wise to include some legumes in there. So I know the question you want to ask me is, what about bloating? Okay, because some people are very sensitive to it. Well, there is some good news because it's actually an enzyme that helps with the digestion of a particular carbohydrate. It's not the protein part. It's one of the carbohydrates that's in legumes because they're not pure protein. They also have complex carbohydrates, which is great for us. and lots of fiber in, which is great for us. But that one type of carbohydrate is the one that's the sonderbok. It's the culprit. Okay, so we actually don't possess that enzyme, but it's good news. Our microbiome does. So our little friendly bacteria contains this alpha-galactosidase, and if you expose it gradually and slowly more and more regularly to legumes, it actually upregulates that enzyme, and over time it will learn to make more and more and more, and you will stop bloating. We eat legumes every day. Literally every single day we eat legumes. We don't have an issue with bloating. Our bodies are so used to it. So the recommendation then is start slow, small portions, and build it up over time. And then there's another nice little trick. If you cook your legume and you freeze it and then defrost it and eat it, it actually partially breaks down that carbohydrate already, and it does reduce. Also, I must mention this, proper rinsing of your legumes also makes a difference. So when we started off going into the vegetarian kind of pathway, I used to boil as it was cooking, I would in the middle of it stop it, rinse it off, and then put clean water on and continue the cooking process, and that definitely helped us. Now I don't do that anymore because we are fine with it. Okay, so the recommendation, and this is not from me, this is from the CUP. This is a continuous update project that is run by the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research. They run this continuous update project. So what they're doing is they are continually looking at new information that's coming out and updating their information of what is current, what should be changed. And they are recommending 3 to 7 servings of legumes per week to reduce cancer risk. Okay, and one serving is about half a cup, so it's not really a lot. Half a cup's not a lot of legume. We eat much more than that. Okay, and legumes are really good. There are so many different legumes out there. It's just to get into it and just start figuring out what you can do with them. Okay, so I'm going to move on to what about fish? So just to remind you, in the AHS2 study, fish had kind of the same level of low risk as if you had dairy and egg in it, much better than the flesh meats, risk for cancer. So my recommendation is then if you do decide to include fish in your diet though, you should go for small wild caught fish. And why small? Because the larger types of fish get so large because they eat other fish. And we know that our oceans is highly contaminated now, full of pesticides, full of mercury. And the more one fish eats other fish, it bioaccumulates, and then you eat it and you get all that risk. So at the moment, salmon is your highest risk for mercury toxicity. That is your mercury pill if you want salmon. Want mercury? Eat some salmon. So I also just want you to keep in mind when it comes to farmed fish, and their salmon is the big thing, is that there's a very high pesticide load. Because they keep them in a small area, there's very high risk for all kinds of things, especially fungi actually. So they dump all kinds of things in there. So that is a very high risk. And just remember with mercury, the neurological problems that you can get. There's no definite cancer proven to be associated with mercury at this point. Who knows what's going to come out in the future still, but definitely neurological issues. So keep that in mind. What is the big advantage of fish? Anybody wants to tell me? Yes, our omega-3s. So we're going to, just now, I'm going to touch more onto omega-3s, and we're going to look into that a little bit more because that is a very important point, where we're going to get our omegas from. Okay, so now moving on to our fats and oils. So I'm kind of done with protein now. Okay, we can get off that bandwagon. Okay, so a fat is solid at room temperature. Oil is liquid at room temperature, but Inside, their makeup is kind of similar. They're made up of fatty acids. Okay, so I'm going to start us off by looking at our saturated fats. So I'm always starting with our bad news first. Get that out of the way. So, dankie Anne-Marie, jy kan hoor my mond is droog. Dankie. So our saturated fats is what we find in our animal fats. Lard, butter, cream, cheese, that all has saturated fats in. And here's a little surprise. Palm oil is also saturated fats. We see lots of palm oil everywhere. I'm going to talk more about that a little bit. And then coconut oil is also saturated fat. But it is a little bit on its own, and I will explain that a little bit. But before I go on to that, or maybe I should just now immediately say, most of these fats, except for coconut, is predominant in a fatty acid called palmitic acid. And I'm going to show you the risks, and then what happens in your body, and I'm going to explain to you why this happens. Then you'll understand. Okay, so this is again looking at the Nurses' Health Study you may recognize. It was in many of the epidemiological data from last night. The health professionals follow-up study is also a very big study, 172,000 people. That one is just in women. This one was in a mixed population. So there's a whole lot of big studies here. So here, this is looking not at cancer incidence, but I thought it would be remiss of me not to mention heart disease here, cardiovascular disease. I thought I must mention that. It is just fair to us all. If you, in the nurses study, women, this is women, replaced 5% of their energy from saturated fats with unsaturated fats. So unsaturated fats are your seed oils and your olive oil. You had a 40% decrease in your heart disease risk. In a mixed population, men and women, with simply a replacement of 1% of their energy from saturated fats to unsaturated fats, there was a 6 to 8% lower cardiac risk. This one showed same story, 5% energy replacement, 20% reduction, 5% energy replacement, 19% reduction. And this one looked at, here they looked at ratios with when your unsaturated fatty ratio was lower than your saturated fatty ratio, you had a 42% risk reduction. So that was if you had more unsaturated fats, you had a risk reduction in that study. So I know you are being told, eat the butter, eat the cream, eat the saturated fats. It's good for you. It's not cholesterol that causes heart disease. And it's not only cholesterol that causes heart disease. We know there's inflammation associated. We know all that things. But the epidemiological studies tells us differently. And go speak to any cardiologist. And they will say to you, it's not a good idea. Okay, so I want to go back. I wanted to talk about this palmitic acid. Why is this happening? So this particular, I actually became aware of palmitic acid while I was still practicing. And I had one of the Nestle reps coming in and saying to me, we are adjusting our formula for our baby formula. We're taking palmitic acid out because it's been shown to, even in babies, increase the risk for artery disease in their hearts. And I was like, what on earth is going on here? And I looked into it, and it is proper scary. So palmitic acid is a predominant fatty acid in all your animal saturated fats, including palm oil. Okay, so we know that it raises LDL, the bad cholesterol. That is proven in studies. We know that it causes inflammation. And I have got the pathways here. There are several pathways through which it causes inflammation. The biggest one, or one of them, it's not the biggest one, it's not the only one, is tumor necrosis factor alpha. You can just hear the word tumor, so you should go like ping. That is very much pro-inflammatory and known to be cancer causing. But I don't have any hard evidence that it's definitely causing cancer, but we know the mechanism exists. So I just want to put it out there. It also causes, this palmitic acid causes insulin resistance. So for those with type 2 diabetes that thinks, oh, it's fine because I'm not eating so much carbohydrates, careful with your saturated fats. This is not helping you. It also reduces nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide is responsible for keeping our arteries soft so they can open up and close up as you need it. If there's not enough nitric oxide, you get high blood pressure. So also one of the problems there. And oxidative stress. Remember the sparks? Goes a little spark there. That is from palmitic acid, can also cause oxidative stress. So it's not a good thing. Okay, why do I mention palm oil? Because we need to learn to read labels. Please, when you buy something, like even these bars and all these things, please read. It's very commonly used because it's cheaply produced. It's easy to work in there. And it is really not a great thing. Most of our fast food outlets mix palm oil in with their seed oils because it makes it more heat stable. So if you get your chips from Steers tonight on the way out, I don't know for sure that Steers use it, I'm just saying, but there's a good chance that they will have palm oil in their mix as well. So coconut oil is a bit different. It has palmitic acid in, we know that, but it's about 10% of its oils, but it also has lauric acid in. Similar, but less pronounced effects. It also raises your LDL, but this one also raises your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. So it raises both. But we are unsure about risk. The risk is still unproven. And actually in countries where coconut oil use is very high, like Thailand, those kind of places, there's not a very high incidence of cardiac disease. So we are still very much unsure what this means. But there's no doubt that it does raise your LDL and your HDL. So that's all I can tell you about coconut oil at this point. The claims that coconut oil is so good for your brain at this point is all anecdotal. That is from people's impressions. We don't have hard scientific studies that actually proves it. So I'm leaving it at that. Okay, so then we've got different other oils. We've got our monounsaturated oils, our olive oil. Olive oil is generally thought to be really good for us in low to moderate amounts. Why is this important that I'm saying low to moderate amounts? Because when we look at calories, it's important because we don't want to go obese, right? Every gram of a carbohydrate will have 4 kilocalories in. Every gram of a protein will have 4 kilocalories in the same. But when you look at fats, they got 8 kilocalories per gram. So it's like double the amount of energy that you take in with fat. So you have to be cognizant of that. Even with the good fats, with the nuts, the seeds, all those kind of things, just be mindful that it may cause some weight gain. Okay, so olive oil generally thought to be healthy for us, but I want to just caution you when you buy olive oil to just make sure that it's cold pressed. Because olive oil, although it's fairly heat tolerant, at the heats that they normally extract oils out on a refinery, you don't really want olive oil to be exposed to that. So look for cold pressed oil if you can, and be careful for blends, because sometimes you will see olive oil, oh, this is really cheap. Then it's a little bit of olive oil and a lot of sunflower oil in there. So just watch out for the blends. I've been caught out like that with a bottle. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's a blend. I didn't realize. Okay, so then our polyunsaturated oils, that's our seed oils, very vilified, as I mentioned last night. I would still feel that they are not the absolute worst thing in the world as long as you don't use extremely high heat with them and don't ever reuse oil, because that's when the carcinogens really start building up in them. But really, I would suggest very low use. In our home, we use seed oils really only in baking where we need a taste neutral oil, because olive oil has quite a strong taste. So we need something very neutral. If I bake muffins or something, I will use like macadamia oil rather. But when I bake a cake or cupcakes or whatever, I choose normally canola, simply because it has a bit of omegas in. Try and push my omegas a little bit as well. So canola, that's the advantage of the canola over the sunflower oil. Okay. We don't have very clear data on facts and cancer risks, but I thought I should just share this information with you anyway. So I'm sorry if I circumvented the cancer thing a little bit here. But as you know now, we've got very clear data on what happens with our hearts. So, and our arteries. So whenever there's cardiovascular disease, we can know that we also sit with stroke risks. The two runs together, right? So that's not a nice thing. Question about margarine. I knew that was going to come up somewhere. Margarine, the biggest thing is to take a seed oil that is a liquid and to make it solid enough to spread it, they have to hydrogenate it. And the biggest risk with that was the formation of trans fats, which is bad news. Toxic for your arteries, okay, and for many other things. There's definite cancer risk and definite inflammation risk with it. Most of the margarines you will have now will say it's trans fat free, but that's not the only problem with it. There's also other processes that happens, and I don't want to belabor this because our time is almost up and I'm not even out of nutrition yet, but this definitely not the way to go. Okay, next I'm quickly going to look at nut intake, what the data shows. More than 7 servings of nuts per week give you a 20% lower mortality. This is not incidence of cancer, okay? Cancer mortality, I couldn't find anything on incidence. I could only find on mortality. So that will influence those who's already been diagnosed with cancer maybe to know that nuts definitely seems to be a little bit protective, and it tends to run through all these studies. There is a protective effect of nuts. So the recommendation for nuts is about 1 serving a day, and a serving is about a palm size of nuts. Okay, don't go overboard. It is fatty, but it is worthwhile. Okay, I think I'm going to end up with fats tonight maybe. We'll see where we go. Okay, omega-3s, very important for us. Our biggest source is fish. The fish get their they don't make the omega-3s, they get their omega-3s from algae that makes it. Okay, so but now we all know that there is a risk with fish. So if you are going to decide to take an omega-3 supplement from fish oil, it's very important that you look what they say on that bottle. They must say that it's pharmaceutical grade, and they must say that it is mercury-free. Otherwise, don't touch it. But there are studies that even with really good fish oil will tell you that they said actually it's just one study that I'm aware of, so I mentioned it's an isolated study that has shown that there is some micro-ulceration in the bowel with fish oils. So that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm unsure what that means long term. I'm just mentioning it for your information. So now you know why your mom gave you cod liver oil. Okay, for the omega-3s. But there are other sources of omega-3s, of flaxseed and chia. Those type of omega, though, needs to be converted in your body by your liver to the active forms. So it is a bit of a process. The more you consume it, the more your liver upregulates that process and the more you will do the conversion. But to be honest, you will never quite reach the amounts that you in your blood levels that you can with a fish oil. But it's wise to use it regularly. And it's only really important to take a supplement if you're worried that you're deficient. Okay, just remember that. Supplements are only there for deficiency. We must be careful with taking stuff in when our bodies don't really need it. And we will see that maybe tomorrow night in another part of our conversation. Flaxseed needs to be ground up to release the omega-3s in there. And just a reminder, any form of omega-3 can interfere with blood thinners. If you're taking blood thinners, be careful with omega-3 intake. Okay, just one big shout out to seeds. I'm not going to talk about it more, but seeds are full of minerals and good stuff, selenium and magnesium and good stuff. So don't forget to add some pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds in your meals. Okay, so just to quickly show you risk reduction with omega-3s, but this is all with fish oil, 10 to 30% reduction in colorectal cancer, 10 to 15% cancer risk reduction. So it is important for us to make sure our omega-3 intake is important. There's one thing I just want to point out. Oh, sorry, that one that I showed you, I apologize. That one was, yeah, that was cancer risk. That was colorectal cancer, okay? Breast cancer risk, same story. There's a definite reduction, but not as much as with the colon cancer reduction. I'm just flashing these studies up so that you can see I'm not sucking these things out of my thumb, right? Okay, now one more thing just to mention, that when it comes to inflammation and omega-3, it's about ratios, as so many things in our bodies are. If we have too much omega-6, which comes from seed oils, and too little omega-3s, it's the ratio that's the problem. Then it drives inflammation in our bodies. In the Western world, most people's ratio is over 6 to 1, while it should be between 2 to 4 of omega-6 to 1 of omega-3. So that's why it's important to add your omega-3s in, because most of our processed foods have got seed oils in. So especially if you do use processed foods, remember your omega-3s, very important. Carbohydrates. Are carbohydrates really the big enemy? Just a big reminder that insulin spikes is what we are worried about with processed carbohydrates or refined carbohydrates, while with complex carbohydrates, we get a very gentle rise and we don't have to be so concerned. So carbohydrates has got starches on the one side, and then we've got fruits and vegetables on the other side, right? So our starches can either be our refines, which we want to avoid. We've established that last night already. I'm going to quickly show you. If you take refined carbohydrates, which has a high glycemic load, this is a colon cancer risk increase, okay? So let's stay away from our refines. On the other hand, we've got our whole grains, our oats, our barley, our millets, sorghum, quinoa, buckwheat. There are so many. We just need to start exploring. And it's quite exciting when you start using them. Our daughter made us a lovely buckwheat salad this afternoon with chickpea dressing. It was lovely. So you can do a lot with all these things. Our whole grains don't just have carbohydrates in. They are rich in minerals like zinc and selenium and magnesium and all those type of things, rich in fiber, all those important things we need. Okay, so fruit and veg intake. Let's quickly have a look. This one first is our whole grains. This is a cancer risk reduction in colorectal cancer specifically with whole grain intake. In these studies, they looked at the lowest intake and the highest intake and compared them. That's why there's sometimes a little bit of a window as your intake increases. Let's look at your vegetable intake. This is a risk reduction. Some of this one, for instance, I just want to point out, I am not convinced of this one. I want to look into that one more, but I think their patient numbers were too low to be conclusive, but it just came up in the statistics. I have not had time to go and draw out the full study and study it properly, but I'm not convinced of this one. I think it is quite dramatic. But the rest, here we look at lung cancer reduction, stomach cancer reduction, even prostate cancer reduction. So breast cancer, unfortunately, in the studies that we have, this was only in one study though, that we had this that they broke it up nicely. Our breast cancer didn't show much of a difference, but let's just point out this is for one study only. Okay, I am talking fast. I quickly want to ask you, it just mentioned something. People are very concerned about the glucose, not the glucose, but the sugar of fruit, which is fructose, and does it give you a spike? Fructose, which is the fruit's sugar, first has to be processed through your liver. So it doesn't normally spike you. It's a slow process. It first has to go to the liver where it then turns it into glucose. So it's a slower release, but in fruits like grapes, watermelon, that's kind of fruits which are very, very sugary and watery. You can taste they're watery and sugary, it's sweet. Some people are very sensitive to sugars, may experience that they have a bit of a drop. So you just need to get to know your body. But fruits generally is not going to give you massive spikes in sugar. It's going to give you a nice gradual rise, What about fruit juices? Yes, because you've removed your fiber. So your absorption is going to be so much more quick. So a fruit juice should be regarded as a sweet. It's like a special treat that you have every now and again, only preferably with another meal that's full of fiber and protein and fat and all the good stuff. Okay. What about smoothies? Smoothies retain the fiber, so that is a better option. She did tell me she needs to go. Thanks for coming. Just a little reminder is that many times smoothies are very calorie dense, so just be careful with them. They can help you to grow very rapidly. And the other thing with the smoothies is because you don't chew, you don't get the advantage of your amylase, which is an enzyme that helps with the digestion that already starts in your mouth. And also, you don't stimulate your satiety hormones because you're not chewing. Your satiety hormones is what make you feel full. So that is why often after a smoothie, you'll feel full, and then an hour later, you're like, phew, I'm hungry. It's because your body didn't get the message that I was actually full. There's more that makes you feel full than just the food. It's a whole cascade of things, and the chewing is part of that. So smoothies are not bad. I'm not saying they're bad. I prefer not having smoothies. I'm not crazy about them. I feel that I feel hungry too quickly after them. I prefer chewing my calories than drinking them. That's just me. But if you're in a hurry, if you need to go, if you want to get a lot of veggies quickly in there, a smoothie is your option. Be careful with how you make it palatable, because many people just add fruit juice in there to make it so that you can actually eat it or taste it, and it doesn't taste too bad, and then you're spiking your sugars again. So that is just one of the smoothie little comments. Then I'm going to move on quickly to fiber. We spoke a lot about fiber last night, that it's so important, particularly for our microbiome. It does other things as well. That helps to reduce the absorption of cholesterol. It helps to moderate your glucose absorption. It increases your transit time. This is important. I mentioned it last night as well. Your food and the food waste needs to move through your bowel quickly. You don't want it to sit there and have contact time, so toxins and bad things can keep sitting in that colon. It needs to come out. So you ideally want a transit time of 24 hours. If you want to test it, this is how you do it. You have a lot of beetroot, and then you check it, and you see when it comes out. And then you know, this is my transit time. Okay, but you want your transit time 24 hours, maximum 36 hours. Okay, and fiber helps us with that. Okay, I just want to quickly show you these statistics. Risk reductions, you can just run your eye down. I don't have time, so we're going to just mention them. Huge risk reductions once again with a nice high fiber diet. Okay, I think I'm going to call it quits tonight. Our next topic was supposed to be our micronutrients. I'm going to tie over the rest of this for tomorrow night. Is that okay with you guys? And then some of what I would have spoken about tomorrow night, I may then push into the Q&A, but I promise I'll still try and answer some of your questions that has come in. Thank you for those who have sent questions in. We've had a few very interesting questions. My wheels are turning. Some of them are questions that I hoped nobody would ask, but they did, Bruce. So, so we will definitely make sure we address your questions. So thank you very much again for coming. I hope this was informative. I'm sorry that I spoke so fast, but I had to get through all this information. If you have specific questions, please, you can ask us afterwards, or you can send us your questions on the WhatsApp. You're welcome to join us for some refreshment afterwards. Thank you very much.